Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday service. Good to see you guys. Thank you guys for your prayers. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I was away for 2 weeks. And I came back on Monday. I'm still adjusting and massively suffering from jet lag. But I'm thankful to be here and thankful that we get to worship together as a church. If we can we just quickly turn around and say hello to people next to us and say, I'm really glad you're here this morning. Really glad you're worshiping with us this morning. It's good to see you guys. I think today's the first day I get to see the seniors, or now incoming freshmen, worship together. So. Okay, if anyone owns a silver MDX, there's an alarm going off in the back parking lot. So if you want to kind of, not to put you on the spot, John, but if you want to silence that alarm and come back, it'd be great. Awesome. All right, if you have your Bibles with you, if you can turn with me to 1 John chapter 4. We've been in 1 John throughout the summer, and we're almost towards the end. So it's 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 to 12. Once you have found it, if we can stand as we read and depend on God's word together this morning. 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 to 12. First John chapter 4, verse 7, Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. This is God's word. Thanks be to God. You guys may be seated. I want you to pray with me one more time. Lord, we thank you so much for your precious word this morning. We confess that more often than not, we don't go through a day. We go through weeks, perhaps even months, without ever opening up your word and meditating upon the truth of your word. We ask that even just this next few minutes that we spend time together in your word, help us to dive deep and drink deep from your word, for it is indeed the life-giving source for all. So Lord, be with us this morning. Strengthen us. We love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you guys are taking notes this morning, title of today's message is Grounds for Loving Each Other. Grounds for loving each other. Friends, what is love? How would you define the word love? If you had to describe what love means in a single sentence, how would you go about explaining it to someone else? What aspect of love would you highlight, and which of the false notions of love would you criticize? Friends, we live in a world where far too often love is misunderstood and misrepresented. And because we have been bombarded by such false images and definitions in our culture through different outlets of media, I believe it is becoming more and more difficult to argue and stand behind the biblical definition of love. Instead, it seems a whole lot easier to simply accept and conform to however the world has skewed and tweaked what is true and what the true definition of love is. A group of curious professionals posed a similar question to a group of highly intelligent 4 to 8-year-olds to hear and understand the kids' perspective and how they understand the concept of love. And to their surprise, the answers that they received were much deeper than anyone could have imagined. Let me share with you some of my favorites. A 6-year-old girl shared, love is when you go out to eat and give somebody most of your French fries without making them give you any of theirs. That is love. A 5-year-old boy shared, love is what's in the room at Christmas if you stop opening presents and just listen. That's deep, right? A 7-year-old girl shared, love is when you tell a guy that you like his shirt, that he wears it every day. A 4-year-old girl shared, love is when your puppy licks your face even after you left him alone all day. Lastly, an 8-year-old girl shared, when my grandmother got arthritis, she couldn't bend over and paint her toenails anymore. So my grandfather does it for her all the time, even when his hands got arthritis too. That's love. Although I do agree that many of these kids' responses go much deeper than even how the media portrays love these days, I believe it still falls short when it comes to understanding and gaining a full grasp of what love truly is. Friends, whether we like to admit it or not, love is indeed a biblical word. It is much more than just a feeling or an emotion. And as we search the pages in Scripture in passages like today, we can clearly see that the very origin or the very source of love starts and begins with God Himself. Love is God's very nature and His essential character. This is why God has been commanding His people to love not only God, but to love one another. If you recall the great command, the love command that Jesus shares in Matthew chapter 23, He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And then He goes on to say, and the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets, referring to all of the Old Testament. Yet the sad reality is how people in the church back then, whom John is writing to, as well as the people in the church today, the people sitting next to us, still struggle in obeying this great love command. For the past 2 weeks, I was away, so we had the great privilege of hearing from two great guest speakers, and Pastor Seth Johnson and Pastor Daniel. But if you recall our time together in 1 John, this book is actually a letter. These 5 chapters in 1 John is a letter that John is writing to people in the church that he loved so much, that he cared for very much. He cared for them so much that once he heard of the issues that were going on in the church, the troubles that the church was facing as people were infiltrating the church to infect the church, his heart broke. And in response, he writes this letter. In those churches, many believed in this false notion that loving others was optional. As long as they loved God, as long as they had a personal relationship with God, loving others was optional. As long as they were doing the things that they were supposed to do within regards to their vertical relationship with God, the horizontal relationship didn't seem to matter as much. This is why John reiterates not once, not twice, but 3 times in his short letter to the church, reminding them not only of how it is indeed a command, not an advice, to love one another, as well as the grounds or the reasons behind why we are called to love one another, why we should love one another. I don't know about you guys, but personally for me, I too struggle and I have a hard time loving others. And I'm in need of this gracious reminder today, this morning, of why I should love, especially the ones I have difficult time loving. So won't you join me as we look at verse 7. The first, why should we love one another? The first ground in why we should love one another is because love is ultimately from God. Love originated from God. Look at me in verse 7. It says, beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Friends, love is from God. Although we often associate love with feelings and emotions, the origin, the very beginning starts with God in His unconditional love of total commitment towards rebellious and disobedient sinners. That's the gospel initiative, isn't it? The unconditional love of God and his total commitment towards rebellious and disobedient sinners. Friends, nowhere does it say in the Bible, God will only love you if we ... If God's love for us was in any way conditional, then we would all be disqualified. We would all be doomed, and we would be disqualified from his love, because to be frank, there's nothing in us that would cause God to love us. Let me say that again. There's nothing good in us that would cause God, a God who's creator of the universe, would love us. No matter how nice we dress up on Sundays, no matter what our GPA might be, no matter what kind of degree or accolades we have added to our name and our resumes, no matter how many followers you have on Instagram, the Bible describes us at the end of the day as rebellious and disobedient sinners, deserving nothing but damnation in hell. But despite all that, the good news of the gospel is that God's love for us is not motivated by who we are, but it's motivated by who he is. Although there might not be anything lovely about us, God still chooses to love us because it is his nature to love. And he desires nothing more than for us to know him in the most personal and intimate way. This is what it means to be a Christian, right? Although we were once dead and enslaved to sin, by his grace, through Jesus' work on the cross, we are now adopted into this new family with God as our Father. And so in this new life, this new birth, if God is our Father, the more we get to know him, the more we will become like him. The more we will resemble his character. The more we will talk, act, and love like him. Look at the person sitting next to you. Do they remind you more and more of Christ each day? Now point that arrow towards yourself. Do you remind others more and more of Christ each day? Friends, let's think about our personal relationship with our parents, whether we like it or not. We possess their DNA, a lot more than others, because we are related to them. Some of us have our mother's eyes. Some of us have our father's nose. Children often possess the nature of their parents as they are genetically passed down to them. And what John is saying is how a similar thing is true of those who are now born again, who are now born of God. If God in his nature is to love, then everyone who has been born of God now partakes his nature of love. As we are loved by him and as we are known by him, as his children, we cannot help but to love. Friends, the reason why we should obey God's love command to love others is because we are first loved by him. This is the first ground for the command to love others. We are born of God, and we know God personally as our Father. Friends, let me ask you this morning, do you know God personally? Because if so, this word to know is very different than to simply know about. It's not referring to simple facts and knowledge about the person. We can know a lot about our favorite celebrity or favorite athlete, but we do not know them personally. Instead, to know someone conveys the meaning of being related to them and having a personal and intimate relationship with God. I'm sorry if I bring this up too much, but I can't stop thinking about the scene in the movie Elf where Buddy hears an announcement that Santa is coming, right? Santa is coming. So immediately as he hears the announcement, what does he do? He jumps up and he starts shouting, Santa, right? And then he begins to tell everyone about how he knows him. He doesn't just know Santa like everyone else. No, he knows Santa. He really, really knows him. He has a personal relationship with Santa. I wonder if that's the kind of excitement we have in our relationship with God. Friends, our God is not asking of us to conjure up some fake, counterfeit imitation of love. But our love for others ought to simply be a response, a result of us being born of God and being in a loving relationship with God. The sad reality is that many in the church are experts at displaying such fake and counterfeit love. But in the end, we can see in verse 8 that if we do not have an ongoing, genuine relationship with God on a regular basis, we don't have the ability to love others. Verse 8 says, anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Perhaps some of us have tried. Perhaps some of us have actually tried to apply this message into our lives. We try to really go out of our ways to love others, even our enemies, but we come to a point, don't we? We come to a point where we feel as though we've run out of fumes. We can't give anymore. We've hit our limit. Maybe the issue isn't that person is just unlovable or difficult to love. Instead, maybe the issue lies because we're not tapping into the true and real source of love in our personal relationship with God. How can you possibly try to extend the love of Christ to others when you are not taking advantage of the loving relationship with Christ? Friends, let me make myself clear. The Bible says God is not asking any of us to become the source of love. He's not asking of us to be the source of love. No. He's simply asking of us to become a channel of His love, to become His hands and His feet, to become His instruments of love. Yet if we're not connected to the main source of love, what we are indeed giving can't be true, genuine love. But if we're truly born of God and know God personally, then we are called to demonstrate by a life of love. Not only when we feel like it, not only when it's beneficial and advantageous for us, but even if there is a cost, even if it is difficult, even if it requires sacrifice. We hate that word, don't we? We are called to love because God first loved us. Friends, we are commanded to love because love comes from God. Not only is this written about in the Scripture, but it's also displayed for us to see and to remind it each day on the cross. Look with me in verse 9. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent His only Son into the world so that we might live through Him. And this is love, not that we have loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be the propitiation for our sin. We see in verse 9 that the love of God was made manifest among us. Now that word manifest means to make known or to be visible. The love of God was displayed for us to see in sending of His Son on a search and rescue mission from heaven to earth. So first we see in verse 9, God sent. God sent. This means that God is the one who initiated. Not us, but God. When we were the ones who were living in a life of sin and rebellion, God was the one who initiated. If you look in the Old Testament, we see a cycle, don't we? A cycle of rebellions and disobedience among people whom God created Himself, whom God created in His image to resemble His love and His character. But what do they do? Over and over and over again. Rebellion, disobedience. Rebellion, disobedience. Yet despite all that, God was patient. He was gracious. He was merciful. Yet in the end, rather than wanting to repent, rather than wanting to reconcile with God, people kept on sinning. But God did not give up on humanity. Instead, He sent the only representative who is qualified and capable to atone for the sins of humanity, to take their place, to receive God's wrath in full. And that was Jesus, His only Son. Friends, what's incredible in that word, God sent, is how more often than not, if there's a conflict between two parties, I'm sure you've even gotten to an argument with your friends or your siblings. If there's a conflict between two parties, in order for there to be reconciliation, you would think that the offender should be the one who initiates. It's his fault. It's her fault. So why? She should be the one apologizing to me first. She should be the one, or he should be the one initiating. But instead, what we see in the gospel is that although we were the very ones who rebelled against God, we were the very ones who disobeyed God, we see that God did not simply wait for us, but He Himself initiates by sending His Son. God sent His only Son. God didn't just send anyone, he sent his only son. He knew that Jesus Christ, his only son, was the only solution, the only remedy. God could have sent any one of his angels, or even Abraham or Moses. No. God sent Jesus Christ, his only son. Now, this word only means unique, one of a kind, one of one, who shares in the very nature of God in a way that no other created being share. It means that there was no one, and there is no one like Jesus Christ, and he was the only answer, the only one who could rescue us from our sins. And that is who God sent from heaven to earth into a world full of sinners. So why did he come? First, we see in verse 9 that he came so that we might live through him. He came so that we might live. He came to rescue us and give us life. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, and you were dead. You were once dead in your trespasses and sin, in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. This was the state of who we were once before Christ. Before Christ, we were dead with no hope, with no sign of life. We were rebellious against God. We hated God. We were children of wrath. And we're not even looking for God. Yet none of this stopped God from loving us. None of this stopped God from sending his son, because God knew that the only way for us to live was through Jesus Christ. Friends, what does it mean to live through Christ? In and through Christ, we are now a new creation. That's the concept of being born again. We are born again into his family, where we have a personal and intimate relationship with God. We now have full access to God to experience his love and to share his love with others. Our once broken relationship with God is now forever reconciled, and nothing can ever separate us from his love. To live through Christ means we are given a second chance in life, a new beginning with a new identity. Doesn't matter what you did in the past. With our eternity now destined to be with God forevermore, rather than to suffer forever in hell. This is why God sent Jesus, so that in him we might live. But we see in verse 10 that there's another reason why Jesus had to come. Verse 10, it says, and this is love. Not that we have loved God, but that he loved us. And he sent his son. Why? To be the propitiation for our sins. Jesus had to come so that he might atone for our sin by dying on the cross. Now, I don't know about you guys, but we don't often use that word, do we, in our everyday language? Propitiation. What does that mean? We don't often use this word, but it's a very, very important and crucial word in the Bible. So what is that word? What is propitiation? How would you use that in a sentence? It basically means to turn away or to satisfy God's wrath. Propitiation means to turn away or to satisfy God's wrath. To better understand this word, it's helpful to look at ancient pagan religions and how they worshiped their gods. For example, in Greek mythology, gods were often very fickle, and they were easily angered by humans in their disobedience. So whenever human worshipers sought to appease that anger, what they would do is they would offer sacrifices to the gods. In a similar manner, although our God does not demand of us sacrifices to appease his anger, in order for us to live, someone had to take our place to turn away or to fully satisfy God's wrath. And that's exactly what Jesus has done for us on the cross. Someone said propitiation is a word that includes 6 things in its definition: God's holiness, God's wrath, God's justice, God's mercy, God's love, and God's grace. That's a lot, right? God's holiness, wrath, justice, mercy, love, and grace. Although many of those words don't really seem to belong with one another, that's exactly what was happening and what took place on the cross. Let me explain. You see, because God is a holy and just God, he can't stand the sight of sin. And because sin is at its core is rebellion, right? So what is sin? Sin is disobedience to God and his command. Sin is a direct violation to God's law. And so his law demands that justice be done. His law demands for sin to be punished. And because God is a God of justice, he cannot simply just allow sin to go unpunished. God couldn't just simply snap his finger and say, sin, be gone. No, that sin had to be punished. But our God is not only a holy and just God, he's also a merciful, loving, and gracious God. So God desired the salvation of all people. So what does he do? There was nothing that sinners could do to earn his forgiveness, to earn his grace, to earn his love. And so that's why God graciously does something for us that we could never do for ourselves, which was to pay the price for our sin. When Jesus died on the cross, he became our substitute. He took our place. He took the wrath of God for our sin upon himself so that all of God's justice and payment for our sin can be satisfied. That was what was taking place on the cross. You see, when we look upon the cross, we need to make sure that we don't only see God's love for us, we also see his mercy, his grace, as well as even his holiness, his justice, and his wrath. All of that was taking place on the cross. A beautiful exchange, perhaps even a scandalous and a very unfair exchange was taking place on the cross, where Jesus took away what we deserve, which is wrath, which is condemnation, penalty or payment for our sin. And in return, he offers us in exchange what we don't deserve, which is mercy, grace, and his love. Friends, perhaps the reason why we don't have a deeper and greater appreciation for God's love is because we do not know and understand the magnitude of our sin and our disobedience. Friends, sin is serious, and God hates sin. But being a merciful, gracious, and loving God, he provides Jesus Christ to take your place, to take our place, so that in him we can live. The greatness of his love is demonstrated by its cost. God sent his son Jesus to be the propitiation for our sin. He does all this for us, not because we loved God first, not because we did anything to earn his love. No. What does it say? But because he first loved us. And we will never grasp and understand what love really is if we don't start here. With God's loving and gracious initiative to save a wretched sinner like us. So then what's this got to do with loving others? Friends, Jesus didn't just die for you. He died for everyone sitting in this room. He didn't only die for you. He died even for people that you have a difficult time loving. He didn't just die for people who you have an easier time loving. No, he died even for your enemies. I love how John starts off verse 11. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. If this is indeed the love that we have received, not because we were any more lovable, not because we were any more qualified, but out of his grace, out of his mercy, out of his love, then who are we to sit here and say, we still have the final say in who we will choose to love? Who are we to filter out who we get to love or who we don't love? If that's the application after listening to today's sermon, I'm sorry, but that means we do not know God. You cannot claim to be a follower of Christ because the love of God is not in you. The love of God displayed for us on the cross 2,000 years ago to remind us that this is indeed the same love we are called to display to those around us. As God's adopted, beloved children, we are called to exemplify the love that he displayed for us on the cross. If you truly came from God, and if love truly came from God, and if love that God displayed upon the cross was indeed for you, was indeed for me, if God so loved us, then our response in utter gratitude ought to be that we obey his command to love one another. Which leads us to our application, love lived out. Verse 11, beloved, if God so loved us, if God so loved us in that manner, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected or completed in us. Friends, we are called to love not because everyone we meet are nice. That's not true, right? Even in this church. We are called to love not because everyone is easy to get along with and everyone gives us what we want. No. We are called to love because God first loved us. And now, as his children who are born again, who know God, to love others is not optional but obligatory for Christians. Let me say that again. This love command to love others is not optional. It's mandatory. Not only when we feel like it, not only to those who are more lovable. No, friends, we are under moral obligation to love one another. And if our greatest commandment is to love God and love others, then the greatest sin perhaps is to not obey that command. Friends, we have an obligation, a responsibility to love one another in response to God's love for us. And as we love one another, we see in verse 12 that although no one has ever seen God, we will be able to see God through, how? Through the lives of those who demonstrate his love for others. Many of us are sitting here this morning because the love of God was displayed in and through someone who really loved you. Not because you were lovable, not because you were special, but because they were simply being faithful to God's command to love you. The reason why we are able to stand here before God and before each other is because someone has loved us sacrificially. Someone has invested their time, their energy, their life in loving you and pointing you to the true source of love in Christ. Not so that we can say, thank you, and move on with our lives. No, so that we too can partake in this great mission to be his instrument of love. Friends, let me ask you, do you see God through the person sitting next to you? Do you see the love of God displayed through the person sitting next to you? Or do others see God through the way you love them, through the way you love others? Friends, when we love others, it is proof, clear evidence that God abides in us and his love is perfected. That means the opposite is true as well. When we do not love others, is proof that God does not abide in you, that his love is not complete in you. So friends, may I urge you, may we love unconditionally and sacrificially, not only when it's convenient for us, not only when it's beneficial for us, but love sacrificially, to love unconditionally, to love like Jesus. May we commit to love at all costs, for that is how God first loved us. Not only people in the church, but the people around us in our workplace. For some of us, we're starting a new semester in school. There will be people around us, and I guarantee you, there will be people who you just cannot stand. God, in his sovereign plan, perhaps placed that person in your life so that through that person you can grow, you can be stretched in the way you display Christ, even to those who are perhaps the most difficult loving. I pray that our church will be full of people who learn to love, not out of guilt, but learn to love as a response of the love that we first received from our God. Let's pray together.